and welcome to Deep in Pact, a proud member of the Doof Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most underappreciated work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Warhouse.
And we are back into plot this 2 days. Is there a word for that? We're back with the main story, back with our favourite three characters, Blake, Rose, and Maggie. And they're all sitting in the library. Maggie's reading a book.
Yeah.
And it's a good way to start the chapter. Maggie is clearly loving where she is right now.
Well, it's sort of a recurring thing she brings up in this chapter, that she's just desperate for knowledge.
How desperate, Elliot? Is she desperate enough to do something crazy? Well, we'll find out later. Spoiler alert.
But we get this little thing where the three books Maggie's kind of skimming through are the three books we saw excerpts from in the previous interlude. And after 1.x, which was Rose's diary, I think it was probably the very next chapter, we had a little throwaway line from Rose talking about how she'd skimmed through Rose Sr.'s diary.
Yep.
So, it's just a little thing, and I don't really know why I like it so much, but just this little thing of, tying those page interludes so they're not just, cherry-picked random excerpts, but they're, cherry-picked little excerpts of what these characters have skimmed past, just somehow connects them a lot better, and I like it. I don't know. It's nice.
You get the sense that we're kind of having the same reaction that Maggie is reading this very same thing that we read, last chapter.
Yeah.
So I want to call out maybe one specific note that you left here, Elliot, saying, Maggie is just so delightful. That is an opinion I maintain all chapter.
Yep. I will probably have to defend that more in a couple of minutes, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I also pulled out two specific lines. Just one where Rose says, "This is exhausting, watching every word you say and watching every word others say." And my response to reading that line was just, yep, it would be. We're kind of doing it for fun and a couple of hours every week, but with your life on the line, this would be, and we see this, this is a pretty friendly conversation for most of this chapter, but Maggie's just never quite answering questions. And I think Blake specifically calls that out in another line later, but it's just, it would be so exhausting to talk to these people.
Yeah, and Blake and Rose are clearly getting frustrated at the way this world works. We pulled out another line here, which is just a thought from Blake where he thinks, I was getting damn tired of people who didn't answer the questions they were being asked. Blake.
With all this karma stuff and having to commit to something that you state, everyone's kind of got a good reason for being so non-committal about everything, but it'd be so bloody frustrating to work with.
It must be so easy to just think, well, the easiest way to do it is to never be honest and never be vulnerable about any of it, right? Then there's literally no risk, which makes sense, but it's also frustrating for a number of reasons. So basically, Maggie they have a little bit of talking about Maggie wanting to kind of negotiate a way for her to access the library a bit more. But before they dive into that, Maggie kind of gets sidetracked, I guess, just kind of being nice to them and handing out info as a bit of a sign of good faith, I suppose. She talks specifically about Molly a bit and how Molly went being a practitioner.
Yeah. Which is, this was really fun to reread. Obviously, we sort of have to read the chapters twice for this podcast, or at least I do, once to just experience it, and then once to really, go in and have a close eye. And this conversation was really fun to reread because it's so recontextualized by what we find out at the end of the chapter. It's so well, said by Molly and so well written by Wildbow. Nothing in her sort of statements threw up any alarm bells for me the first time through. And then you're reading it knowing what we know at the end, that she's the one who killed Molly, called the attack that killed Molly. She doesn't quite lie, and she walks that line so well, and I just it was so fun to reread this conversation. And I feel like there's probably going to be 100 times in this book where I'm going to want to jump back a few chapters or something and reread conversations for stuff like this.
Yeah, the thing I like the most about this part is the different tone that it takes on once you've read the chapter the first time versus the second time, right? Because Maggie is endearing herself to Blake here, to Blake and Rose. She is talking about Molly because Molly, is someone that Blake cares about.
I mean, I sort of had a different reaction. I sort of genuinely believe that Maggie's quite remorseful about the part she played and is sorry. And I very much saw this, like, she's the one who points out, like, oh, is that Molly's stuff? And it almost feels like she brought up Molly just because it's something that's on her mind and, maybe even something she was thinking about getting off her chest. Probably she wasn't actually going to be able to do it. But no, I got this sense of, like, the way she brings Molly into the conversation, the first time I just read it as, like, random friendly act, whereas this time it was more like she's just... she wanted to talk a bit about Molly to assuage her guilt or something.
I do agree that she's genuinely remorseful. I think that point comes quite clearly across throughout the chapter, but I think, I don't know, she really does ride the line. Specifically, we get to the part later where it becomes explicitly clear that she didn't come here to, make amends or anything. She came here to gain knowledge, and then kind of almost as if a rom-com, this was a rom-com, it started out that way, but now it's so much more, in the 5 minutes that they've known each other.
Yeah, that's true.
And that makes me less, of course I like her as a character, but it makes me like her less, keeping that in mind. Anyway, let's continue ahead. So Molly kind of starts giving information about goblins, which we come to find out are a topic that she knows quite a lot about. Specifically, she talks about how goblins like to operate outside of urban areas, preying on people who are having bad days and making those bad days worse.
Yeah, she basically seems to imply that the reason wealth inequality persists in the world of Pact is partially because of things like goblins. Like, if you're poor, you're just easier to prey on for these things, and it means you're sort of always having bad luck and you can never quite get on your feet.
Yeah, I think in the real world, these cycles are already quite vicious. And we see in the Pact world that it's even worse because there are literally supernatural entities making these cycles more literally vicious. Yeah. So Blake has an interesting reaction to hearing this. He basically flashes back to 2 individual times when he was having a bad day and people came along and made it worse. And he kind of thinks, reliving this memory, he thinks something was off about the people in these memories, and at the time I brushed it off, but now that I'm awakened and I know this about goblins, he doesn't fully make the connection, but it's obvious that he is making the connection in his mind. They were goblins, or he thinks they were goblins.
Well, he's unsure if it's just like his memory twisting, like, especially traumatic memories can have a bit of a way of, blowing themselves up and stuff in your head, or sort of switching out details like that. So he doesn't really land either way. He thinks his mind's probably playing tricks on him, and like, that's probably where I'd lean to. Like, I wouldn't put this past, like, fuckwit teenagers or something, but given what he's been going through in the last week, he's well within a position to want to recontextualize everything that's ever happened to him. So I get why he's wondering this. I just don't know where I land on it. I think it's an interesting thing to sort of think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I land on it being actually goblins or Blake just kind of being wishful thinking, but I think what's interesting about this is Blake flashes back to his trauma, and then almost immediately afterwards we have Maggie kind of dropping hints at her background, her trauma-related background, right?
Yeah.
She kind of describes how she's basically become the Batman of goblins, where goblins messed up her town, and now she's reincorporating goblins as a symbol to strike fear into the heart of, Gotham.
Yeah, and so what was interesting is something you've written here is like whether it's that sort of trauma, like turning that trauma in her past into something she's controlling, whether that's so dramatic that it's like something that makes her more powerful or better at it because of like karma or the spirit's love for the dramatic. And I'd never thought of that, but as soon as I saw you'd written that here, I was like, yeah, I'm 100% on board for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we have a better idea of how some of these things work in the short term, but do dramatic long-term narratives work better? Who knows? I guess one other thing that we should just point out here, because it ties back into a theme from this chapter so far, is Maggie kind of reflects on how it seems eerie that Rose disagrees with Blake on things from time to time. And in her experience, she kind of thought that Rose would be more of a subservient vestige, but she's actually got a real personality. And Rose's response is, "Oh, we're not giving any information up on that. It's kind of a sore point. Sorry." And Blake thinks, "Sore point?"
Yeah. Really, Blake? Like,
yeah.
Like this is a surprise to you? Like, really? This is.
It's getting to the point that it's kind of comical that Blake is so unaware of all these story beats that have been happening, to basically, telegraphing the conflict that hopefully will come between Rose and Blake.
Yeah, I mean, if I wanted to really put my tinfoil hat on for now, I could say that it's partially a sore point because of all this stuff about how she's going to have to replace him and she doesn't want to talk about that because that is a sore point if it exists. But I think really this is more a testament to just how out of it Blake is. Like, this whole chapter is just him, like, he makes himself a little sandwich out of like moldy bread just because he needs something to eat. He's just wrecked. And so I'm willing to let him chalk a bit of this up to he's just really messed up at this point. But yeah.
Yeah, he's still very exhausted from the activities of this chapter. So Maggie and Blake kind of get, and Rose, I suppose, I put a bit of a Blake there. They get back to the discussing Maggie's access to the library more often. And so Blake and Rose kind of get close to an agreement about being happy to give her access, as well as, giving her the council meeting deal where they won't set demons on her if she offers them something every time she visits. So, some power, a trinket, something. And Maggie seems pretty eager to take this deal.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a pretty fair deal to me. It depends on exactly what Maggie's offering and what books they give her. Like, there's probably room for either party to try and like fuck it up,
to pull some shenanigans.
Assuming you're on friendly terms, this seems like a decent arrangement. But I guess so Blake is just not really trusting his current mental state, which I think is very fair. Probably the most sensible thing he does all chapter. And wants to get it in writing and do it later. So he's basically sort of saying Maggie should just head off and like maybe he'll sort it out within a day or something.
But she really doesn't like this. She made the comments before about feeling blue when people dangle, knowledge in front of her. But she really seems to take it hard. She gets quite angry about it, actually. It does seem to come out of nowhere to an extent, right?
They seem to touch some sort of nerve related to like the fact like they sort of call her out for hanging out with bad people like Johannes and stuff, and that's when she really blows up. And I'm like, this may tie into what we find out at the end of the chapter. Like, she says that she doesn't like working with the Behaims and the Duchamps anymore because they they fucked her over with this whole Molly thing a little bit. So it could be related to that, but it definitely seems to be a bit of a sore point for her. Discussing her allies and friends, or lack thereof.
So Blake basically forces her to take a time out, and they kind of sit in silence and consider the deal and cool down. And Maggie clearly is feeling pretty remorseful after this. Not just at the fact that she blew up, but also because she possibly is ruining her chance at library access here. And so she kind of offers a show of good faith, giving them a trinket, a little paper thing that contains the spirit of like a goblin that they can, detonate to get, some extra firepower if they need it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's basically a piece of paper and you throw it and a goblin comes out and, attacks whoever it's pointed at.
Yep.
Which is pretty cool. And there's a great little line, because he also shows her the hatchet he's put June in, and she calls it an axe, and he calls her out and says, no, it's a hatchet. And she's like, oh, that's just semantics. And it ties, like, my brain immediately went there, and so did Blake's, where he just thinks of Paige. And I'm hoping that that's foreshadowing her appearance in the next arc, because I guess I'm expecting in the next arc somebody, either his friends or family from his previous life, are going to start to show up. But I would like to see Paige again. I thought she was fun in the first chapter.
Fair enough. I think it's yeah. One other thing I want to call attention to is I like how every time someone misnames June's axe or hatchet, Blake immediately corrects them. It's happened multiple times so far, and it really does. Like, the reason he does that, at least in my interpretation, is because he is kind of trying to pay respect to June, which really brings home the point that he really does see her still as a kind of sentient thing. He really hasn't kind of got around to just seeing her as a tool, which is great.
Yeah.
It's a great kind of character beat for him.
I think he started doing it even before she hopped in, or maybe it was right after she hopped in, but he did it to Rose as well. She called it an axe, and he's like, it's a hatchet. It just seems like, I don't know, it must just be like one of his pet peeves or something, because he doesn't seem too fussed about semantics generally, although that's changing now, obviously, because it's so, his life depends on it. But that seems to be one that I feel like he'd be doing it even if he wasn't a practitioner. Like if people called it an axe, he'd be like, no, it's a hatchet.
Well, yeah, maybe there is a bit of that where he's just more used to these kind of tools, and that gives him the pedanticness about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, there's little hints here through this thing with the Ofuda that it hints at the ways that being a practitioner is different in other cultures. Last chapter we got these hints that the idea of a familiar implement domain as this trio was a very Western idea of how to be a practitioner. And we get more hints of that, of other kind of options here, which is, who knows if it'll be relevant, but it's very interesting at the very least.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense that, after humanity spread across the globe and sort of lost contact, that different sort of standards would have arisen, throughout the world.
Yep.
And this also, I think, explains part of why I think the Thorburn library is going to be so valuable. Because Rose's mum, spent all this time in that interlude, just running around the world collecting books, which is probably a really smart thing to do because that would give you so much cool insight into what else is possible and other avenues to take things. I feel like that is something that could be such an asset to sort of catch people off guard.
Yeah, for sure. So so Blake kind of heads off he kind of seems to get distracted almost, he tunes out.
Yeah.
And then just goes to go get something and says, oh, hey, I'll be right back. Heads off and grabs a fine chain and then kind of comes back downstairs. And there's a visitor at the front door. It's Laird, and he is pissed off.
Yeah, so I can't help but wonder if karma was somehow involved in this. I don't really know exactly what that achieves, but because you're right, he just sort of zones out, and he's not even really thinking about the hair when he just gets up and he's like, oh, I'm going to go to my grandma's room, and he gets this locket, and it's not till he's down the stairs that he really thinks this will be great for hair. So he's just kind of
he doesn't really know what it's for, right? It's weird.
Yeah, it's so subconscious that it almost feels like something pushing him away, which and then obviously he comes down just as Laird arrives. So the timing of that, I don't really get what this achieves, but it seems like something may have been involved there.
Something's going on, yeah. Anyway, so Laird's at the front door. He knows that it was Blake. He's come to basically say, hey Blake, remember how we kind of had that temporary ceasefire? I mean, I was fucking you over, but we were kind of cool. Well, not anymore. Now I'm gonna fuck you up.
Which, I mean, this is exactly what they were expecting, right? This was the obvious follow-up to what just happened. So,
yeah.
I kind of like Blake points out a number of times in this conversation how, Laird's trying to rile him up or, offend him, but he's too tired to give a shit.
He's just too tired, yep.
He doesn't have to try and play it cool because he's too tired not to. And he's just sort of standing there listening to Laird and thinking, thank God I'm too tired to do anything about this because it's making me seem really cool.
Yeah. So Blake plays it cool. Laird basically says, two things. One, I'm going to retaliate. It will probably be tomorrow, and it will be bad enough that you will really regret it.
And I love this little tidbit as well that Blake's going to know, Blake's going to notice it within a day or whatever, but he won't really see the the ramifications. I should have pulled out the line, but there's basically a bit where Laird says you're gonna see it, but you're not gonna really appreciate how bad it is until it's too late. And I'm very excited to see what this weird attack vector. I'm imagining this is gonna be some attack vector I haven't even considered, and I can't wait to see what it is.
Well, we'll see. And the second thing that Laird says is, "Hey, also, is that Maggie in there? Well, guess what? It was Maggie who killed Molly. She was acting on orders of the council in exchange for information. Set her goblins onto Molly." And Maggie basically tries to explain that she thought Molly was just a scary diabolist, and when she actually kind of saw the attack being carried out, she regretted it immediately and unsuccessfully tried to take it back. But Blake doesn't really go for it. He gives her back the Ofuda, which is very strongly hinted that the goblin inside was used in Molly's murder.
Oh, not just that. The Ofuda was. It also is implied that the Ofuda is what she was rewarded or what she was given for attacking Molly.
At least part of the reward for carrying out this murder was the ability to know more about Ofuda. Potentially how to make them.
Now, I mean, this could all be part of my desperate attempt to build a narrative where Maggie isn't really the bad guy in this situation. But it does seem like she wasn't really that informed. Like I think she dove in head first because she was just being greedy and didn't want all the details. And it even sounds like the attack wasn't meant to be lethal, and she actually fucked that up. Which is a sort of important detail. But yeah, there's so much cool stuff going on here. Like, Maggie seems genuinely remorseful, and there's all these details that make me think things just kind of got out of control, and it wasn't meant to be this bad. But also, I don't blame Blake for hating her for it, especially when you consider that he point blank asks her, "Were you more here to make it up to me, or because you wanted stuff for yourself?" And she just sort of doesn't answer, which is basically I was here more for myself.
I think it's easy to think, if I was in Maggie's situation and I heard about a very scary diabolist, okay, maybe I could be convinced to do something like this. But I don't know. Maggie's been in the world for 6 months, 5 months charitably when this attack was carried out. Not even. Blake has been in this world for, not long.
A week?
A week, 2 weeks.
If that,
and if Laird came up to Blake and said, "Hey, we'll pay you some knowledge and power to go kill this person. Oh, they're bad. Don't worry about it." I mean, Blake wouldn't go for it.
Yeah, no, it's it does seem like I kind of don't blame her for hearing scary diabolist, and we just want you to mess her up and thinking, oh yeah, that seems okay. And but then also you kind of like, well, you should have gotten more info. So yeah, it's just a messy situation.
Yeah, I don't see a world where Maggie takes Laird or the Duchamps or really anybody at their word, right? I think it's fair to expect a level of responsibility.
Yeah.
If you're going to carry out an attack on somebody because someone that you almost certainly know is untrustworthy has told you to, right? I don't know.
Yeah, but what, Maggie's 16 or something? I don't know,
It's true.
She acted a bit rashly. Yeah, anyway.
Well, that's the end of the chapter. It kind of ends on that, on Blake kicking her out and the ship of Mag Lake sinking.
See, that's funny. I've been calling it Blaggy in my head, which...
Yeah. Neither of those are good names.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this chapter obviously is about Maggie being endearing, right? Basically the whole way through, she's very endearing to Blake, to us, the audience, and then we get the ending. We get Maggie revealing that, that thing that you've kind of has been on your mind, that kind of heinous act which kicked off this thing. Yeah, that was me. Surprise. It's an interesting chapter. Twists the knife a bit.
Yeah. And it's just a good old fashioned, after having sort of the action scenes that have been sort of dominating the previous chapters, and then the sort of Miss Lewis, exposition heavy, thing. This is just some good old fashioned character development. It's all characters interacting. We have Blake being so tired that he's basically a passenger sometimes. Maggie's kind of this fun new wild card we're learning about throughout the chapter. And then Rose is just constantly kind of being a dick to Maggie, and we don't fully understand why. But it's like a fun little dynamic that balances out the chapter really well. It's great.
Something else I liked about this chapter is Laird comes in and delivers knowledge to Blake that he has been looking for ages, right? Like, it would be very easy for Laird to earn some face with this, but he's just so fucking smug about the whole thing.
His reward for giving Blake this valuable piece of information is just how much it like messes with Blake. Like he was more than content with just getting to fuck Blake over.
Yeah, he even says something to the effect of, "I'm going to tell you this, but I don't want to take your deal, so I refuse your deal. Here's this." Yeah. Like, man, he's such a jerk. He's fun to hate. I guess that brings us to the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
So for our little bonus bit, our little bonus content this chapter, we wanted to talk a bit more about implements. And, we talked for 40 minutes about the last chapter, but I guess it wasn't enough because we have still more things that we want to talk about. We want to talk about, I think it would be a fun thing to just kind of theory craft implements for ourselves. Maybe this is something we can do in the discussion thread for this episode as well.
I'd be interested, and we'll probably try and talk about this at the end of the next episode. Like, if people as a sort of discussion question, if you want to talk about like an implement that you think would suit you, or if that gets too personal, because we've gone and done ours, and it turns out it's a very personal exercise.
Yeah. It is quite a personal exercise, yeah.
To a celebrity or a fictional character, I don't know, whatever you're comfortable with, but it's a lot of fun sort of sitting down and trying to come up with something that symbolizes you or someone and how you operate.
Yeah. So I'll go first, I guess, Elliot. I'm just going to take it.
Sure.
And the thing I liked about this is we both kind of ended up coming to the same approach about this, which is kind of the CV writing approach, where you basically think, what are my character strengths and what are my like weaknesses,
Yeah, I very much sat down and was thinking, how do I like go at like when I'm at work or when I was at university, what worked for me and what didn't? And you're right. It was very reminiscent of sitting down for your CV and being like, what is your weakest trait, that sort of thing.
I work too hard, Elliot. Well, that's just the answer. So I kind of broke it down into some positive traits, some neutral traits, and some negative traits about myself, and kind of tried to find a implement from that. So for the positive traits, I wrote down quite observant, likes collecting knowledge, quite direct, which I know is going to translate into some kind of phallic symbol, of course, because that's just the way these implements seem to go.
That was what we learnt in the last chapter, definitely.
Yeah. It has to either be directly phallic or directly not phallic. There's no in between. So for kind of neutral traits, I thought if I was a practitioner, I would really dig the dramatic aspect. And so I would want something that kind of stands out, that says a bit of a like, hey, I'm doing this a little bit differently. And for the negative traits, I put that I would possibly be quite single-minded. Like if I was gonna be a practitioner, I would very much like focus on something, dive down the rabbit hole and chase that down. So, in an extent that's good, that's blunt, that's to the point, but the negative of that is probably getting a bit tunnel visioned and not focusing on the kind of holistic picture.
Yeah, sure.
So putting that all together, I thought, observant, collecting knowledge, direct, showy, and single-minded. I thought what I came up with was a spyglass. So a little mini telescope, right? Which kind of makes sense. For the declarative, it's observant, but only when pointed at one direction. So it has the potential to gather information about something or to focus on something, but miss things if you're not looking in the right place.
Yeah.
It's pointed directly at something. It's very direct. It's blunt. It's phallic, and it kind of suggests this mindset of observe, plan, then act, and kind of sticking to that rigidity there. The socio-cultural, I had no idea how to do this. It was a difficult one.
Yeah, so we sort of tried to do the declarative, authoritative, and socio-cultural for our implements, and that was the hardest one for sure, the socio-cultural. Yeah,
thinking about it, obviously it was an actual practical tool back in the day when boats were a thing. Nowadays, it's probably not that useful, and so that felt like it fit the kind of showy nature. Practitioners that use it would probably be pretty showboaty because it's basically just a worse version of binoculars. And that's kind of what I came to. Yeah, so I came up with a spyglass. I felt that was a pretty appropriate implement.
Yeah, sort of going to my approach. I sort of did the same thing as you, sort of trying to look at I worked and stuff. And personally, I tend to work best when there's sort of regularity, like when I schedule things. Like I like to plan out everything. And if I don't sort of make like a to-do list or a schedule for myself, I often like don't really get anything done. I also struggle to start things, but once I've started, I get like a really good rhythm and I'm in the zone. And sometimes like this would sort of be the weakness column, I guess. I have a tendency to focus so much on doing things properly that sometimes I may not, or I get in the way of doing them at all, just because I'm so focused on trying to do it the best way that it ends up taking longer.
So put all that together, and what have you got?
I went with a metronome. I thought declaratively it sort of suggests this idea of like rhythm predictability, but like practice as well, because obviously a metronome is like a practicing tool for musicians. It's also quite like going back to the phallic conversation you just brought up. It's like I don't think it's very phallic. I don't know. But they're definitely quite unwieldy, and it probably suggests that if I'm thrown off my axis, you know, like if you tip a metronome over, completely blows it up.
It's done. Yep.
Yeah. So that's probably the negative part of the declarative. And so for authoritative, which we should probably go over, like declarative was sort of what it suggests to other practitioners, right?
What it kind of suggests about you based off of what the tool is.
Yeah, and then authoritative is how it would affect what you actually do.
Yeah, when you use it to use magic or whatever, how does it impact that?
Yeah, and so I thought like the authoritative, like I've always been drawn to, you know, when we read things like Worm or talk about practitioners and stuff, I'm always drawn to the idea of like the masterminds, the behind the scenes people who plan stuff and then execute like the big plans. And I think a metronome kind of lines up with all of that. Like you're a bit indirect. Like the metronome itself is indirect. It's just assisting the music, that sort of thing. And then for sociocultural, again, this is the hard one. I just associate metronomes with classical music and classical music with posh people. So I kind of assumed that, like, you know, the sociocultural is meant to be the category for like what sorts of practitioners use this. And I assume it's probably practitioners who are, you know, the reserved, quiet ones who sit in the background and maintain the order.
Yep. Yeah, it kind of evokes ideas of the traditional to me. From a
exactly.
Of like socially, but also maybe like having a lineage or family of practitioners, right? Like an old money kind of family.
Yeah, exactly. So if there's any old money family practitioners looking to adopt me, I'm available.
I'm open for it. Yeah, that was a bit of a different pick for a little bit of additional content there, but we thought it was a fun one, and we'd love to hear what people see in themselves or in other well-known figures that they can translate into implements. It's a fun little exercise.
And I think we'll try and, you know, if we get some good ones, we'll try and highlight them in our next episode.
Yep, sounds good. Speaking of our next episode, that will be another interlude. That's Damages 2.y, which is coming out on the 11th in not too long, not too many days to wait.
Yes, that's Monday. Yeah.
And if you want to find that episode, well, you can find it on our new home, doofmedia.com.
Speaking of Doof, you know, if you subscribe to the Doof Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia, that directly supports our show as well as a number of other great shows that are on the Doof network.
Yeah, and speaking of Patreon, I think I've been reading somewhere that Patreon is about to kind of up their cut that they take from patrons. So if you are supporting any patrons, like the Doof Patreon or the Wildbow's Patreon, who writes these beautiful stories for us to explore, please do take some time to check out your donation and say, hey, maybe it's time that I could update this. Or if you're not a patron, check it out. It's pretty cheap and you get access to a whole bunch of cool things and you help us make shows that we want to make. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. So there will also be a discussion thread where, as we've mentioned, you can tell us all about implements you think would suit people. And that'll be in the show notes associated with this episode.
Now, I don't know what kind of prize we would give, but I'm going to give at least a great shout out to my favorite answer in the discussion thread, especially if it's of a pop culture character that I really like. So that's the challenge. That's the homework.
Okay.
And that's everything. We'll see you back here in a few days for Damages 2.y.
See ya.